Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Live Your Extraordinary Life podcast. My guest today is a professional magician, a motivational speaker. His TEDx talk so far has garnered over 3.5 million views on YouTube. He is an author. He is the founder and lead coach of Beyond the Red Dot. I am so pleased to introduce you to my friend, Brian Miller.
Hey, thanks,
Brian.
Michelle. I am so excited to be here.
Brian, I am so excited to get started. So I'm going to throw a number at you and let you respond to it. 80,000.
80,000, big number. 80,000 is how many people you meet and interact with over the course of a lifetime. It's an underappreciated, very little known kind of average number. Obviously, if you live in the middle of North Dakota in a town of 300 people, it's going to be a little bit lower than that, right? But like on average, we meet about 80,000 people over the course of a lifetime. And I discovered that back when I was building my career speaking on human connection, and I was trying to figure out a way to show my audiences why human connection, the day-to-day interactions we have are so important. And I stumbled upon this number. And if you take 80,000 and you work it backwards, because I have a math degree that I've never used, so this was my moment. I got to work 80,000 backwards, and you find out that you actually meet an average of 3 new people every single day. Of course, this was not true for the last few years, but it was actually more true than people realize, even in virtual settings. In fact, I'd be curious if people met more than that because online we were just pinging back and forth so much. But
I
yeah.
think you might be onto something. It may actually be higher. So at minimum, we're meeting
hmm
around 3 new people a day. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that because I'm fascinated. I read your book over the weekend and I'll make sure everybody has a link for this, but 3 new people, make the most of your daily interactions and stop missing amazing opportunities. It is a great read. And you wrote this a while ago. It is so pertinent still today. It's one of these evergreen books. So I really highly encourage people to pick it up. You can get it right on Amazon. So let's talk a little bit about how you got to the book because your story is not conventional. I don't think anybody comes out of colleges and says, I would become a professional magician and then I'm going to go on and become a TEDx speaker. So let's back it up a little
Yeah.
and tell me how this all came about because I'm curious. You're 22 years old and you're touring as a professional magician. So maybe bring us back to the college
Yeah.
days. Is that early enough or do we need to go further back?
Well, I mean, you can always go further back, but yeah, let's start there. I mean, in college, I was actually there originally to study music. I was there originally for audio engineering and guitar. And in the middle of my freshman year at college is when the music industry went bankrupt for the first time. The music industry collapsed. And so this was like the Napster era, like when Napster killed the music industry and iTunes hadn't saved it yet. And so I was a freshman in college and in a major that I wasn't convinced a few years later would even have an industry for me to work in. And so I panicked and had to abandon ship on like the love of my life, which was music. I felt I needed to for my own career. And so I actually switched into I was going to be a high school math teacher. My family are all mathematicians, they're all computer scientists. That made sense to me. After a year in the math and education program, I got really bored of the education classes, which were asking us to write the same paper over and over again. And so I dropped the education major, and then suddenly I was a math major. And the problem with that is I don't like math. I'm good at it. I inherited from my parents. I know how to do it. It comes natural to me. Yay for me. But I don't enjoy math at all. It doesn't light me up. But I was staring down junior year of college and I was only a math major. And I was like, well, this is the most ridiculous option. I don't even like this. So I picked up a dual major in philosophy because I had always loved my philosophy classes in high school. I was at a rare high school that had philosophy classes. And mostly what I knew about the philosophy was the Matrix at that time, right? Whatever I learned in the Matrix, I thought it was super cool. And so I picked up a philosophy major and got obsessed with contemporary philosophy of language, basically analytic metaphysics. And I was planning to do a PhD in that. So that was my plan. My plan was to do a PhD in analytic metaphysics and be a philosophy professor. So I got accepted into some PhD programs right out of undergrad. I was about to start that PhD. And at the last hour, I abandoned the PhD, declined the offers, and went off to pursue card tricks for a living.
How
So
does that moment come about? I really am
it was
curious.
a tough phone call home. Yeah, mom and dad, both computer scientists. My dad's a world renowned computer scientist. My mom's a systems engineer, government security clearances. And I was like, guys, I'm going to do magic. And it came about because I had been doing magic all my life. My dad was obsessed with magic. His father, my grandfather, was obsessed with magic, but just as a hobby, as an interest. So I went to magic shows all my life. I had magic kits all my life. There was something about the creation of an impossible moment for somebody in a very tangible way that was just very exciting. And I was bullied a lot as a kid, and you'll find a lot of magicians and comedians are kind of revenge of the bullied. It's kind of that career. You get to get one up on the people that used to bully you. And so I loved magic, and I had actually been putting myself through school, like not like I was on scholarship. So by no means was I supporting myself fully. I hate when people lie about their past and make it sound more interesting than it was. I was on scholarships. My parents were, reasonably well off and middle class. So I didn't struggle in that way. But my dad also wanted me, because of that, to pay for anything that I wanted outside of the necessities of school and food and clothes, right? So I was working as a magician on nights and weekends all throughout college. I did a lot of my papers on the road in hotel rooms throughout college doing magic shows. And then I just had a moment where I was about to graduate and I was staring down 7 to 9 more years of school en route to a PhD, right? This
Yeah.
insanity of time where you're just going to sit in a research building locked away in an ivory tower for like 7 or 8 more years. And I thought, you know what? Your academic resume never goes away. 20 years later, it's the same resume you had. All your grades are the same. You can always go back to school. Thought I can go back to school in 10 years or 20 years if I need to, or in 2 years if I need to. But I'll never get a chance to be 21 or 22 with no ties, no relationship, no mortgage, no kids, and get a chance to try to make it as an artist, right? As a magician. And so that was it. 2 months before graduating, I went, nope to PhD, yes to card tricks. Graduated, moved to a state where I didn't know anybody on purpose, away from parents, no safety net, and got a roommate and did the starving artist thing for 2 or 3 years. Ate rice and lost a lot of weight and was not healthy, but made it through it.
Well, and lucky for us because we would not know you as we know you today. You'd come into our lives in a different way. But so lucky for us, you did not pursue the PhD at that time. I'm going to throw out a few quotes that I found really interesting. And quite frankly, they're the heart of what you are all about and what your talk is about, what your book is about. And I want to delve into that.
Sure.
So, picking up from your magician days, you say magic isn't about the trick or the illusion, it's about connecting. I would love for you to expound on that. And if you wouldn't mind,
Yeah.
share the story about Ed.
All right. So let's talk about the quote. Magic isn't a, I don't even remember what I used to say. What did I say?
Magic
Magic
isn't
isn't it?
about the trick, it's about connecting.
Yes, of course. In my early years as a magician, I was consistently struggling to get the responses I was looking for my audiences. I wasn't, and I was one day there was a veteran magician at the show, a mentor of mine, this great older magician, and I was complaining to him. Said, I'm not getting the laughter that I want on the jokes. I'm not getting the applause I want on the tricks. What is going on? And he said, "Can't you hear the problem just in the way you phrased the question?" I will never forget this moment. And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You're trying to get something from everybody. You're trying to get applause. You're trying to get laughter. It's all about you." He said, just what if you showed up for your next show and you walked on stage and the whole time you were up there, all you were trying to do was give an experience to the audience, give them laughter, give them a break from their 9 to 5s, give them the experience of wonder that they've lost since they were kids. What if you just showed up to give? And it broke my brain and it changed my life. And essentially, what he was saying was if you want to get what you're looking for, you need to give selflessly first. You need to show up in a way that considers the perspective and puts at the forefront of what you're doing the perspective of the audience. Who are they? What do they want? What do they need? What are they struggling with? And then show up in a way, and you happen to be a magician, but this is true if you're a plumber or a teacher or an accountant, show up in a way that puts their perspective, their wants and needs at the forefront of your interaction. That's basically what he was saying. And as soon as I did it, it was like overnight. I didn't change the tricks in the show because for years I've thought, oh, maybe I just don't have good enough tricks. If I have a better card trick, then it'll do it, and that's what magicians think. If only I could have a better trick or a better joke. Turns out if you show up with the mindset of what can I give instead of what can I get, if you show up to connect with people, give people the gift of human connection, everything else just follows suit. And my shows got infinitely better basically overnight with that mindset without even changing the jokes or the tricks.
You really impressed this idea upon me. It's the simplest of ideas, but it's one that just it's so profound. I come from the corporate world, and I will tell you in the last, I don't know, I've been in it for over 25 years. And in the last decade, increasingly, I talk to people about it's not about the one more hour of hustle
Mm,
and grind. It is not about one more hour of hustle and grind, similar to your story about not one more trick or one better trick. This is the business of relationships. It's all about
yes.
connecting.
Yes. And anybody who thinks they're in an industry that's not about relationships is lying to themselves. There are no industries that are not about relationships because there are no such things as businesses or companies or organizations. When I hear people talk about their company or their organization, I'm like, there's no such thing. It's just a collection of people. It's a building with a logo. That's not going to do it. It's just there's a bunch of people inside that building or in the virtual building where they show up with their logo in the Zoom room. There's just a bunch of people. And your clients and customers and people you're trying to serve are a bunch of people. It's all relationships. And somehow over the last 100 years, and especially the last 20 years, we've been like on this race to automate ourselves out of the equation somehow, to like just shove humanity out of the equation as much as possible. And back in 2015, when I gave my TEDx talk, and then the years following that, I kept saying to clients on stages and in workshops, I kept saying, if you do not learn how to double down on human connection very, very soon, you are going to lose big time in the long run. And when COVID hit, it was like all the predictions I'd been making for years like just came true. The companies who had not doubled down on relationships, they're the ones who instantly went out of business, right? Apart from
Mm.
the too big to fails, apart from the Amazons, right? And a couple of the too big to fails failed. I mean, like, and they got bailed out, right? Because we have a different problem over there, but that's not my area of expertise. That's just me grumping, grumping around myself, at Thanksgiving, annoyed in conversations, are the kind of
You
conversations
and
you
a
have
lot
around the
of other
table.
people.
you
You're
know,
not alone. All
but
right.
but that's the truth is that anybody who's not doubling down on relationships and connection are just, you're not going to last that much longer.
There's a quote I love, and every now and then I resurrect it. And in this moment, I can't recall who actually said it, but it's the business of business is relationships, and the business of life is human connection.
No, 100%.
Like,
I 100% agree to that. Yeah.
I have always been extroverted. I've always made a lot of friends. I had great relationships. And yet something felt hollow, even in the ones that I was able to maintain. And you talk about that. You said
Yeah.
you've never had any problem making friends or even starting relationships, but there came a time where you were starting to realize a pattern. You had a difficulty maintaining them. Talk more about
Yeah.
that and that realization, because I think that's such a reflective, introspective moment
Yeah.
for you. And it doesn't always come to people that early in life.
Yeah, I'm really lucky it came that early. I wish it had come earlier. I spent years and years because I had developed the skill of entertaining, so I can be funny and witty and magnetic externally, much like you. Externally, when people look at me, they're like, oh, that guy's got whatever, charisma, X factor, magnetism, whatever. And I'm not saying this to put myself up. I'm actually saying it for the opposite reason. People like that struggle more with human connection than introverts do. It's reverse of what you think. Introverts ask me a lot. They're like, "How do I connect with people? I'm an introvert." I'm like, "That's your superpower when it comes to connecting with people. You make people feel heard just by being you because you're so good at listening, right?" But extroverts, we have this habit of loving the fact that we're able to be quick and witty in the center of attention, and it's great a little in the moment. But what happens is if you don't then shift your focus to them, ask meaningful questions, show the people that you're in the room with that you're not just quick and witty and funny, but that you're also interested in them, you're going to lose those relationships in the long run. Whereas introverts may have trouble starting relationships, but they have deep relationships in the long run by and large. And so I realized that most of the relationships that I had cherished kept falling by the wayside. They were just people just kept leaving, abandoning me over and over again. I don't think this story is in the book or anywhere I've ever really told it. So let me tell you this. My freshman year roommate, this guy, Chris, he was the nicest guy I ever met in my life, sweetest guy. Just, he was a gem of a human. And we were bonded at the hip. You know, find me, you found Chris, you found me for all of freshman year. And it was awesome. And so at towards the end of freshman year, there was the day where they gave us all the sheet of paper where you could choose your roommates for next year. So if you each anonymously essentially chose each other, they would put you together. If one of you didn't, right, you obviously wouldn't be, linked up together. And so the piece of paper came in and Chris and I are in a dorm room and I jokingly said to him, "Oh yeah, who am I going to put down other than you?" kind of a thing. And he just responded flatly. He said, "Actually, I think I'm going to room with somebody else next year." And I was just like, "What?" Yeah, but I didn't say that. My brain was, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was just flooded with like anxiety and shame and like instantly sweating. Like I didn't even know what that response was. And I just played it off. I was like, "Oh yeah, well, of course. Yeah." He's like, "Well, I think it's good if we meet some new people." I was like, "Yeah, of course. Meet new people. That makes sense. We're in college." I was like devastated. I was just broken by it. But I wrote that off because that's what we do. It's easy to put the shield up. And I went, "Well, okay, I believe him." It was easier to believe him and just go, "He just wants to meet some new people next year. That makes sense." But then it would happen again. Not necessarily, maybe with a roommate, and then it would happen again with a close friend. It would happen again with a whatever, again and again and again. And at some point, I finally just went, "Well, I'm the link between all these things. It's got to be me." And I graduated college with all these people that I had been so close with that I cherished, and none of them wanted to stay in touch. I mean, I have no friends from college. And now we're talking 15 years later or whatever, right? But like to this day, I have none of those friends in my life. And it's because back then I realized that as deeply as I cared about them and cherished those relationships, I made no effort to make them know that it was all inside my head. It was like obvious to me. And this is a version of, we call it sometimes the knowledge bias, which is the more you know about something, the harder it is to explain to an outsider.
Yeah.
Well, I have found that this is exactly where people's relationships often break down, is that they actually know how they feel about the people in their life so well inside their own head. They assume that those people also know how they feel. I know how I feel about my best friend. So I assume that they know how I feel about them because why wouldn't they? They're my best friend and I have all these deep feelings about them. But the truth is they don't unless we tell them because they're not mind readers and neither are we. It doesn't exist. So I learned a very hard lesson, but early in life, that I needed to go out of my way to make people feel heard and understood and valued. It needed to be explicit and it needed to be consistent.
And I think that that's the key, right? All we ever really want is to be understood,
Yes. Yeah.
right? All of
Yeah.
us. We don't need somebody to solve the problem. We want to be understood. We want that connection. And what a gift to be able to
Yeah.
come by that.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about Ed. It's an amazing story of connection. If you haven't figured it out already, Brian is just the master of understanding the importance of human connection. I think it's something we all intellectually know, but to really feel and embody the way Brian can, and particularly through his storytelling, is something really unique and special. So I'm hoping, Brian, that you'll enlighten us and tell us about this story about Ed. I'm tearing up thinking about it. And I now heard it 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, so I can do my best to tell you the story. It doesn't play as well in podcast form, I've found over the years as I've been asked to retell it. So you're kind of better off going to the TEDx and watching it because of what the story is, which is not me trying to get more views. It doesn't need more views. It has plenty of views. But I can give you the gist of it. So in my early career in magic, so we're now in the early 20s, so we're post the college years that we've been talking about, and I'm building that initial career in magic, and I'm doing a lot of magic at restaurants in that time. I'm going table to table on Thursday night at an Applebee's, doing card tricks and coin tricks and sleight of hand for people waiting for their meals, just keeping them entertained while they're waiting for their meals. And there was a night that I was on fire. I was having one of those perfect nights. Like everybody, remember what you do for a living, every field you're in, you occasionally have a day where just everything's working perfectly. Not most days. Most days are just a disaster, right? We're all over the place. We have no idea what we're doing with our lives. But every so often you get this perfect day. And I was having that night as a magician. My moves were perfect. The tricks were perfect. The jokes were landing. Everyone was laughing. It was great. And so I'm in my little ego magician, I'm the hero of the story of my own life, mode. And I walk up to a table and I just said, hi, my name is Brian. I'm the magician. Would you like to see some magic while you wait for your meals? And the man, I'll never forget it. He looked up towards me. He said, sir, I would love to see some magic, but I can't because I'm blind.
Mm.
And I looked at him like for the very first time. Like I literally hadn't even looked at them yet, right? It was so obvious he was blind. I'll never forget that moment. His eyes, eyes were glazed. He wasn't actually looking at me. He was just looking up in my general direction where my voice had come from. And it was so obvious he was blind. Anybody would have known. But I wasn't looking at them. I was lost in my perfect evening in my little ego circle as a magician. And so I just walked up to two generic people and launched into my show. They could have been anybody. It didn't matter to me. I was just there to do my show. And I was embarrassed. And I had that word ringing in my ears, just going blind, 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 blind. And I just finally, I didn't know what else to do. And it was just silence. So I said, I really apologize. I don't have anything I can do for you right now because I'm a magician. It's a visual art form, right? But then I said, but if you ever come visit me again, I promise I'll have some sort of magic to share with you. That was my way of making myself feel better, right? I was like, if you ever come visit me again, I promise I'll have some sort of magic I can share with you. And he said, I'll hold you to that with a big smile on his face. And I just kind of went on with my night. And a few weeks later, they came back. They walked
The
in.
moment of truth.
I was in the middle of working at a table. I looked up, I see them come in. I recognized them immediately and I panicked. I panicked because after that first night, I had completely forgotten about them. And I mean, didn't even remember meeting them until they walked back in. So I like raced back to the manager's room where I kept all my briefcase and I just like closed the door. I was like, sorry, Erica, I need a second. I think it might have actually been her name. I think it was Erica. It's a long time ago. And I was just like, every trick I'd ever learned, every book I'd ever read, there's gotta be something magic, some magic you can do for someone who's blind. And then an idea popped in my head that I had read somewhere. I didn't know where it was in the cobwebs in my brain at that point. I've since discovered the source and thanked the person who came up with this trick personally. But it was there. So I walk back out, walk up to the table, same guy and his wife. And I said, folks, would you like to see some magic? My name's Brian. And he cut me off. He goes, hey, we're back. What do you got for me? I mean, he had that giant smile on his face again. And so I sat next to him or I sat next to his wife, rather, across from him. And I'm across from him and I said, sir, what's your name? He said, my name's Ed. And I said, Ed, do you trust your wife? And he said, sometimes, which I've always thought was hysterical.
Great sense
And
of
I said,
humor.
I said, can you trust her now for a few minutes? And he said, sure. So I took out a pack of playing cards. I gave them to his wife. I said, mix them up. Make sure there's nothing special, no markings, no abrasions. There's nothing, because he can't see. I need her to verify that I'm not pulling a trick on him, right? And she said, no, the cards are fine. They're normal. She mixed them up. I took Ed's hand. I placed a card in his hand. I said, Ed, do you think this is a red card or a black card? And he said, red. And he was right, which is not impressive, right? 50-50 chance. Anybody can be right. So I place the next one in and he goes red and he was right again. His wife is getting a little skeptical and I place the next one in and he goes black and he's correct again. She's like getting closer and closer. Like her nose is almost on my hand at some point. I thought she was going to start licking my hand. It was very weird. And I kept going red, red, black, red. He's going faster. He's getting all of them right. Red, black, red, red, black, black, black. At the end of it, this guy is laughing. I mean, Ed is howling. He's having so much fun. The entire restaurant was staring at us at this point, right? You can imagine just everybody's like out of their seats, craning their necks over. And I turn to his wife sitting next to me. His wife is just weeping tears of joy, just running down her face. And it was and remains the most beautiful experience of magic I have ever seen in a career as a magician. And in the TEDx talk, I do eventually tell people how he did it. I'm going to leave that for the talk
Yeah,
because
go check
it's
it
worth
out
looking
because
at.
you'll love it. And just that ability that Brian could actually make it accessible for Ed and find that way to connect was so beautiful. and had given that gift to Ed's wife, which
Yeah.
was just so, I mean, for both of them,
Yeah.
really, for both of them, for him to feel like he was able to do this and his wife to be there in disbelief and be like, "What?"
Right. And that's the key. The key to it was, what is the perspective of somebody who is blind? What would magic look like, or rather feel like, right? It's not going to look like anything. So, what would magic feel like to someone who is blind? And so, in figuring out how to navigate that moment, you have to ask yourself a perspective taking question. What would magic feel like to them? And the first question for me, or the first thought was, I don't want Ed to feel tricked. The trick can't be on Ed. Like, you normally do a magic trick, you make your audience feel tricked. I can't make Ed feel tricked because he's blind. It's cheap. It's easy. I could do anything. He can't see it, right? I can't use any of the normal tools of magic. The goal for me was give him the experience of being the magician, of doing the magic, and we're going to do the trick on his wife, right? He's going to do a trick on his wife. And that shift in perspective was incredible.
Was that the first time you ever did that trick? I feel like it was
Yes,
divine download for you, where the universe opened up and said, "Brian, this is your
yeah,
moment today."
and it's yeah, and it turns out, so the idea for that trick came from this legendary LA magician who's a hero to many of us. His name's Pop Hayden. We call him Pop. His name's Whit Hayden. We all call him Pop in magic, and he is this legendary LA-based magician, and he had written this tiny little manuscript that was very few people knew about. It was an underground kind of manuscript in magic, and it was somewhere in my psyche from having read it years earlier and come across, it was basically a story, like a magic trick told in story form about a time when he encountered a blind person and had to figure out what to do. And he had come up with a handful of different ways to create that experience. So in that moment, I didn't remember whose trick it was. Since then, and actually, when I was writing the TEDx talk, I had to reach out to Pop, and I said, I want to give away the secret in the TEDx talk. And magicians don't give away secrets, right? I mean, that's the
Right.
whole rule. And it's not even my secret; it's his secret. It's not my secret. He came up with the trick, so it's definitely not mine to give away. And his instinct was no. Like right away, he's like, no, like can't give away the secret. And I said, but you got to understand what I'm trying to do in this talk. And this was back in 2015, in the months leading up to the TEDx. And I'm like, if I don't give away the secret, the audience that I'm trying to explain perspective taking connection to, they won't be able to appreciate how it works and how they can apply it to their lives unless I give away the secret. I'm not giving it away to ruin a magic secret. I'm giving away the secret to help a huge amount of people understand how deeply you can connect with someone with a vastly different perspective than you. And we talked for like an hour, and once he understood that the intention of me giving away a secret, that the potential benefit of giving it away was so much greater than the handful of magicians or the handful of people who were gonna like, I don't think anybody has ever watched it and gone, "Oh, I learned a magic secret." That is not what people come away from that story learning. So if you do go watch the talk, you'll get the secret revealed at the end of it. And I did get Pop's permission. And so thank you to Pop again, all these years later, for letting me do that.
It's worth going and taking a look. It's a great talk, and you do a great job explaining it in the book, and it is good.
Yeah.
Maybe because I
It,
had already seen the video, but it
well,
was really good.
that's it. That's why I preempted the story in a podcast by saying it's really a performance piece to really appreciate it. And when I was writing the book, and I almost didn't put the story in the book because it was like, how do I tell this in written form? But it was like, you can't write a book based on the TED Talk and not tell the story from the TED Talk. So yeah.
All right. You talk about how one encounter, and I'm going to kind of give this away, but one chance encounter with one individual on an airplane changed the
Mm,
trajectory of your life in so
mm,
many ways. Going back to what are you going to do with those connections, with those at minimum three people that you're meeting every day?
yeah.
Can you tell us about that story?
Yeah, I can. And by the way, I love that you are one of the very few hosts who has ever gotten the three new people thing right, by the way. So almost everybody gets it wrong. And what I mean by that is almost everybody, when they ask me about three new people, either because they haven't actually read the book, which is fine. I don't expect every host to read the book. I'm so, appreciative that you did. Usually people think that because the book's title is Three New People, that I'm saying you should go out and meet three new people. Almost everybody thinks
Mm.
it's a prescription. I'm like, no, 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 it's not a prescription. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. You meet an average of 3 new people. And so the question is, what are you gonna do with it? What are you gonna do with those opportunities? You have them every day. People are always searching for, how do I build my career? How do I get more clients? How do I get more successful? How do I get more of this? They're always looking, and I'm always like, the answers are always, they're right in front of you. They're the people you meet every day. It's all these people you're walking past, you're interacting with, that you're treating as transactions instead of actually treating as an interaction, as an end in and of itself, right? The connection is the point. So just wanted to shout that out because
Well,
so
thank
few people
you.
get that right. And I appreciate that. So a few years after, this is great. You're going chronologically now. I'm like reliving my life in 1 hour. This is great. So a few years after Ed, I was on a plane. Well, I was at the airport very early. It was one of those like 5:30 flights or whatever, the first flight of the day, which I used to always take on the road as a magician because I was flying constantly 150 times a year. And if you got to get to the gig, you got to be on the first flight of the day because plane's guaranteed to be at the airport. Little travel hack. If it's anything other than the first flight of the day, the flight's coming from somewhere else and it can get held up. So what that means is you have to be at the airport at 4 o'clock in the morning when they turn the airport on, which is very eerie if you've never been there before. Like somebody flicks a switch, like the airport just turns. There's one switch at every airport, the whole thing comes on. And it's a big switch. Anyway, so I'm at the airport and I've got on my travel clothes that I always wore at that time. I've got on my, do you remember the store Express? I know it still exists, but it's not as popular as it used to be. It was like in every
I know
mall
it
in
well.
America.
I know
Okay.
it well.
Like every mall in America has this store Express, and it was very popular for a while to buy jeans with rips already in them. I don't know if this is still a thing. I
I
don't do
think
it
it may
anymore.
be. I still, as I get older, I think about the more material, the more it should be worth. But yes,
Right.
I am
That's right.
told that the more faded and the more holes,
That's right. The more
the more
expensive.
valuable and expensive it is.
That's right. So for a while there, I was playing a game of how much can I spend for the least amount of jeans? Yeah. So I had my ripped Express jeans with the holes in them. I was wearing a zip up hoodie. I just have to throw this out there for people who don't travel as often as I used to. Some planes are too warm, some planes are too cold. If you wear a zip up hoodie, you can regulate your own temperature. It is the best tip in my keynote. And I have watched executives write it down. So watch CEOs write that down. Zip up hoodie. I like this guy. And I had on a fedora because as a magician, I always used to wear a fedora. And I stopped wearing a fedora because I occasionally would perform at middle schools and kids are mean. So I wish that was a joke. That's legitimately why I stopped wearing fedoras. I was just tired of being
It
made fun
was
of
cool on the
by
magician circuit,
by
though.
by
Very
11-year
cool
olds.
there.
Yeah, it was very cool in the magician circuit. Still is. Fedoras and vests apparently is the magician starter kit. So, okay. Anyway, I'm at the airport and I'm exhausted. I'm burnt out. I've been on the road a lot. My career is not going the way I thought it was going to go. It looks great on social media. I'm flying all over the country doing magic shows. But the truth is, I'm not commanding high enough fees to justify the travel because I'm not famous. I'm not good enough yet. So I'm barely making ends meet despite how great it looked on social media. So I'm burnt out and I'm thinking about going back to grad school. I've actually submitted applications to go back to grad school at this point behind the scenes. A lot of people, even my friends don't know that I did that. And I'm like done. And so I get on the plane and I look at my boarding pass and I have the last seat on the plane. So Michelle, have you ever had the last seat on an airplane before?
Sadly, I have, and that was during business travel, which ought to tell you about what was happening with my business at the time.
Yeah, right. That tells me everything I need to know. Right, exactly. So, it's like 45 miles to the back of the plane, and the last seat on the plane, the bathroom is right there. It's really hard to describe if you've never sat in that seat. It's right there. I can already smell the, urinal cake or whatever. It's super gross. I'm nauseous. It's early. I'm burnt out. Not my morning. And I go to sit down, and my seatmate is already sitting. Now, when I tell this story, I have to pause when I tell this story because the woman that is my seatmate, this is not the story of how I met my wife. It has nothing to do with my wife. And if I don't say that, people think that's where it's going. They get distracted and they miss the actual point. My wife and I met online on a dating website. So that's a different story. Anyway, so my seatmate's already sitting. I'm in my, I don't know, early mid 20s. I think she must be in her mid 30s at the time, mid late 30s. I'm not sure. I can never tell ages, right? And, but I remember that the image of her is burned into my brain because she was wearing a black pantsuit with a pixie haircut. She's drinking a Starbucks and reading the paper. and I'm sweating and gross and nauseous. And you ever like apologizing to someone
And
as
your
you sit
zip
next
up
to them?
hoodie and
In
your
my zip
fedora.
up hoodie and my fedora. Yeah. So I go to sit next to her. My brain is like, she doesn't deserve this, you know? And I sit next to her, and the pilot comes on immediately. You hear that click, and he's like, how we doing, folks? And for people who don't travel like you did, like I did, that is a red flag because I guarantee you at 4 o'clock in the morning, pilots are not chatting it up for no reason whatsoever. They're
No
only
way.
talking to you if there's something's wrong. And so there was. There was. He says it's going to be a 1 hour delay because someone forgot to put the wing on or whatever. And I, that's all I can think in that moment.
It might as well be that
It
bad.
might as well have been, there's one tool in the known universe and it's on a different continent, right? Whatever. It always seems to be something like that. So I go to put on my earbuds to drown out the misery of this morning. And I never put my earbuds on or my headphones on in public. Now, I love music, went to school for music, but as soon as you put your headphones on in public, you put up a wall between you and the world. You tell the whole world, I'm not interested. Now, I'm going to asterisk that by saying self care is important. There are days we need to retreat into ourselves. I have nothing against that. But as often as I can, I try to remain open and accessible, present for anybody, even strangers, especially strangers. You have no idea who that person is. And so I'm not doing that this morning. I'm totally burnt out. I go to put on my earbuds, and right before I put them in, I hear this: I like your hat. And I just turn, and it's the lady sitting next to me. Her face is 6 inches from me, right? We're in that back last seat of the plane. And she kinda laughs and she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I noticed back in the airport, but I thought it'd be weird to come up and say that to a stranger. But hey, since we're sitting next to each other, I just thought I'd let you know that I like your hat." And she says, "Hi, I'm Zoe." And she puts out her hand. I shake her hand, brightened my morning, obviously, and we start chatting. And at some point, we have the same conversation you always have on a plane. So I asked her, "Where are you going?" Which, by the way, is the world's worst question to someone who is on the same flight as you. And somehow we all do it. I said, "Where are you going?" She said, "Minneapolis." I said, "What for?" She said, "A conference." I said, "What kind of a conference?" She said, "Marketing." I'm self-employed. I'm into marketing. I said, "What do you do?" She said, "I teach influence and persuasion tactics at Yale University at the School of Management." She's Dr. Zoe
Unbelievable.
Chance. Chance Encounter with Dr. Chance.
Chance encounter with Dr. Chance. Thank you for just
What
indulging me there.
what are the odds in all the world? A chance encounter out there. But honestly, she says, "I teach influence and persuasion tactics." And my brain was like, that is the coolest job title ever. Are you sure you're not a spy? You know what I mean? And she said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Minneapolis." She said, "What for?" I said, "A conference." She said, "What kind of a conference?" I said, "Entertainment." She goes, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a magician." And she goes, "Get out." Like Elaine from Seinfeld, like, "Get out." And I was like, "No, seriously." She goes, "I love magicians." She was so amped up about it. And I got to tell you, I kind of didn't believe her. You know what I mean? I was just like, nobody loves magicians. You know what I mean? Like, we tolerate magicians at best. And she goes, "No, seriously, I teach influence and persuasion. I study magicians." We talked for the whole flight. It turns out she's not kidding. She knows more about magic than I do, more about magic history, more about magicians. She
Incredible.
literally studies magicians. She is obsessed. At the end of the flight, she says, "You got to let me know when your next show is back in Connecticut." I said, "It's 2 months from now." I told her where it was. She said, "I'll be there." Now, what do you think if somebody tells you that you just talked to on a flight?
That's a nice thing to say, but
Yeah,
unlikely they're going to show.
yeah. Nice
We're
thing to
going to get
say.
busy with life.
Yeah, it's 2 months from now. It was a stranger on a plane. And I was thrilled. I wasn't thinking anything. I forgot all about it. 2 months later, she was right there in the audience. And I mean, no joke. She came up after the show, the exact show I told her about. She came up after the show and she said, "That was so much fun. I have to bring you into Yale as a guest speaker." And I was like, "That's very nice. I am never going to hear from this lady again." This is the second time I'm thinking that, right? That's a nice thing to say, really sweet. But she did. She brought me into her class at Yale 2 months later, that famous class that's now actually very famous because she's a global best-selling author now based on that class that she teaches. It's just one class, an elective at the Yale School of Management called Mastering Influence and Persuasion. She brought me in to do a little magic show, a little guest lecture on the magician's perspective on influence and persuasion. And that put me on the map as a magician because once I could say, spoke at Yale, did magic at Yale. Once Yale was on my resume, all those clients that were unwilling to take a chance on me, unwilling to pay the kind of fees I needed to actually live a decent life as a magician, were suddenly willing to, because if he was good enough for Yale, he's good enough for us. So, in and of itself, that changed the trajectory of my life. And I started getting gigs as a magician. I really, was not just making ends meet, but living a good life. I was touring, I was making it. And if, year, whatever it was, year later, I was invited to give a TEDx talk at TEDx Manchester High School, tiny little TEDx conference in Connecticut, at a high school run by high school students. Literally 15-year-olds ran the conference, filmed the conference, hosted the conference. The audience was 15, 16-year-olds. And I got invited to give this talk, and I called up my old friend Zoe. I said, Zoe, I got invited to give a TEDx talk. She's like, yeah, congratulations. I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I have no idea what I'm doing. Can you help me write this? You've given a TEDx talk before. She had given one in the very early days of TED. And I said, can you help me write this? And so she helped me structure the talk. She's the one who reminded me of the story of Ed. I had forgotten about that
Oh,
years ago.
wow.
I didn't even remember that it happened. I was stuck trying to find a story to hook the talk off of. And she goes, Brian, do you remember that thing you told me a few years ago? This one night, a blind guy at a restaurant. I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that was cool. Like, that was my reaction. I was kind of like, yeah, that was cool. And she's like, it is the best story I've ever heard. I have retold it to my friends, my colleagues so many times. That's the story. No story does a better job of establishing perspective taking and understanding a human connection in that story. So she's the one that suggested that story to me. So I went, told it at the TEDx conference. And when that talk went viral, I started getting calls all over the world to do magic and share my story and speak. And one of those calls came from the United States government, from the military. And I was Navy Entertainment, and they invited me to go overseas for the troops and their families stationed on military bases in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, in all over Asia, and do magic and share my stories for the troops. And I was like, 100%. Yes, that's awesome. And so I started doing those tours. It was like the next year of my life was like just doing military tours like that. And on one of those, I was in Naples, Italy, and my hosts, they're like, hey, you have a day off. Do you want to visit Pompeii? And I'm an American student, so I have a very bad sense of geography anywhere outside of America. So I was like, what's Pompeii? They're like, oh, it's the ancient city covered in ash by Mount Vesuvius. And I'm like, literally, like Mount Vesuvius is outside my window. My brain was like, oh, it's the big hill off in the distance. So we go up to Pompeii. You pay a couple of bucks. You get to wander around this ancient city. It's unbelievable. And a couple hours in, I ducked down an alleyway and it emptied out into a massive outdoor amphitheater. And I realized I was standing on a stage. I like looked down and realized I was on a stage and I was looking out at the seats of this ancient amphitheater. And I was standing in the same spot where thousands of years earlier, my ancestors in entertainment, magicians, jugglers, comedians, actors, they stood right there and entertained their audiences. And this moment was obviously surreal, but what happened inside my head, it told me I was on the right path. That as difficult as things could be in magic, as hard as it could be some days to be self employed, as unpredictable as it was, that I always remembered that moment from that point on as you're on the right path, stay on this path. And if I hadn't have stayed on that path, I wouldn't have ended up doing the speaking and the consulting and the thing, and all these years later leading me to this conversation that we're having right now.
We would have
And
never
that
met.
exactly. And that moment at Pompeii only existed because 5 years earlier, one kind woman on a plane said to a sweaty magician in a fedora, "I like your hat." So, you just have no idea what kind of opportunities await on the other side of that next connection.
Beautiful, Brian. It hits home. Pay attention. You just don't know who you're going to meet. And be
Yeah.
kind and be open. I love it. Brian, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you.
Michelle, thanks so much for having me. This is great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me for part one of my conversation with Brian Miller. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please comment, like, and subscribe to this channel to continue to receive content that inspires. Let us know what resonates and what you'd like to hear more about. You are here for a purpose. It's time for you to step into that purpose, become the most authentic version of you, and start living truly living your extraordinary life. It's never too late. And in fact, we're just getting started.